The vote passed at 0914 station time, and nobody in that chamber expected me to simply sit there. I did. My name is Yael Moran. I was humanities ambassador to the Galactic Council for 11 years. I have sat through negotiations that lasted 4 days without food. I have shaken hands with species that breathe methane. I have smiled at creatures whose idea of a greeting involves showing you their teeth for 30 full seconds. I have done all of this without flinching, because that is the job. But nothing in 11 years prepared me for the moment the gavel came down on Resolution 7 Theta, and I realized the only appropriate response was to close my folder and walk away. Let me tell you what the resolution said, in plain terms. It stripped humanity's trade rights across 14 recognized galactic corridors. It reclassified our colonial outposts as unaffiliated zones, which in council language means exactly what it sounds like. We were no longer a recognized participant in galactic commerce. We were, with the stroke of a crystalline gavel and the votes of 42 species, made irrelevant. The delegate from the Velhari Dominion, a tall, silver-skinned creature named Counselor Veth, did not bother hiding the satisfaction on his face. He had been pushing for this resolution for 3 years. He believed humanity had grown too comfortable in its position, too present, too necessary, in a way that made other species uncomfortable. He was right about the last part, as it turned out. The conglomerate of 7 abstained. They always abstained when they were afraid of choosing the wrong side. I had learned to read their abstentions like a language. This one said, "We think this might be a mistake, but we are not going to say so out loud." The chamber was full that day. There were species present who had not sent delegates to a full session in decades, because everyone wanted to see how humanity would react. They had prepared for anger. There were council security officers positioned near the human delegation block in a way that was clearly meant to look casual, and clearly was not. Someone had drafted emergency procedural motions in case I started making demands. Someone else had apparently prepared a statement about respecting the democratic process of the council, in case I did not. Nobody prepared for what actually happened. I leaned forward. I pressed the small button on the microphone in front of me. The entire chamber went quiet, because everyone assumed this was the moment. The speech, the fury, the list of consequences humanity would rain down on those who had voted against us. I said 7 words. Noted. Humanity will respect the council's decision. Then I released the button. I closed my folder. I straightened my jacket. I stood up. And I walked out. No one moved for about 4 seconds. I know, because I counted my steps and did the math later. 4 seconds of complete silence in a chamber that held representatives of nearly 200 species. 4 seconds where the only sound was my footsteps on the polished floor. Then the buzzing started. Dozens of translation earpieces activating at once. Delegates leaning toward each other. The sound of a room full of creatures who had expected a fight and received instead a closed door. Counselor Veth called after me. I heard his voice, sharp and slightly confused. "Ambassador Moran. Ambassador." I did not stop. My aide, a young man named Colin Bray, was waiting in the corridor outside the chamber. Colin was 29 years old. He had joined my staff 2 years earlier and had learned, very quickly, that when my face looked the way it looked at that moment, the correct response was to say nothing and fall into step beside me. He said nothing and fell into step beside me. We walked the length of the corridor, past the tall windows that looked out over the station's main hub, past the delegates from 6 other species who had stepped outside to watch what happened when we emerged. They watched us. I nodded politely at the ones I recognized. I did not stop. We reached the shuttle bay. We boarded the small diplomatic vessel that would take us back to the human orbital platform. Colin sat down across from me and very carefully placed his tablet on his knee and looked at it as though it contained something very important. It took 3 minutes for my communicator to signal. "Secretary General Lena Farrow," I answered. "Is it done?" she said. "Yes," I said. "Start the withdrawal. All of it." There was a pause. Not a long one. Lena Farrow had been briefed on this possibility for 8 months. She had run the numbers. She knew exactly what all of it meant in terms of personnel, equipment, supply chains, contracts, and every single human being currently working, living, or operating anywhere outside our own space. "Understood," she said. "Timeline?" 14 months. I said, quietly. No announcements, no press, just paperwork. She said, the council will notice. I looked out the shuttle window at the station growing smaller behind us. Eventually, I said. Colin finally looked up from his tablet. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Ambassador, can I ask you something? You can ask. Were you not angry in there? I thought about it honestly. The vote, Counselor Veth's face, the security officers pretending not to watch me, 42 species raising their hands to say that humanity's presence in galactic life was something they could vote away like an inconvenient budget item. I said, but angry doesn't build anything, and it doesn't take anything apart either, not the way we need to. Colin was quiet again. He nodded slowly, the way young people nod when they understand the words but are still working out what they mean. Outside, the station finished disappearing into the dark. Ahead of us, somewhere past the light scatter of a dozen inhabited systems, was Earth, was home, was 14 months of the most careful, methodical, and thorough departure in human history. I opened my folder again. At the top of the first page, in Lena's handwriting from our last meeting, were 2 words she had written when we talked about what would happen if the vote passed. The words were, let go. I had argued with her then. I had said that letting go felt like surrender. She had looked at me with the particular patience she reserved for moments when she thought I was being smart in the wrong direction, and she had said, Yael, there is a difference between letting go and setting down. We are not surrendering anything. We are putting it on the table and stepping back, so they can see what they were holding. I had not fully understood her then. Sitting in that shuttle, with the council chamber behind me and 14 months of careful work ahead, I was beginning to. The stars outside were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels like it's waiting for something. So was I. The first thing most people do not understand about the withdrawal is that it was not dramatic. There were no press conferences, no speeches broadcast across the galactic network, no ultimatums delivered in front of cameras. There was no moment where a human official stood at a podium and said, this is what you have done, and this is what we are doing in return. There was only paperwork. I want you to understand what that means, practically. The human presence across recognized galactic space at the time of Resolution 7 Theta included the following: 47 active relay stations, maintaining faster-than-light communication across trade corridors, 23 bridge network nodes in the Kepler Junction system that kept cargo lanes open through a region of space that would otherwise be nearly unnavigable, 9 medical ships operating in various crisis and support roles across 6 different systems, 412 individual human engineers, technicians, and specialists contracted to other species infrastructure projects, over 2,000 human medical personnel working in clinics, hospitals, and relief stations on non-human worlds, and approximately 60,000 human civilians living and working in spaces that were now classified, thanks to Resolution 7 Theta, as unaffiliated zones. Every single one of those people, those stations, those ships, those contracts, had to come home. Quietly, correctly, with the right forms filed in the right offices at the right times. It took a team of 40 administrative staff working in 2 shifts to manage the paperwork alone. I know because I hired them myself, out of a budget line that I listed as diplomatic liaison restructuring. No one flagged it. I moved back into my office at the human orbital platform and spent the first 3 weeks doing what I did every day, reading reports. The difference was that now the reports were about things leaving instead of things arriving. Relay Station 7 in the Caden corridor. Maintenance crew rotating out, no replacement scheduled, filed under routine personnel rotation. Bridge Node 14 Alpha in the Kepler Junction. Engineering contract expiring, not renewed, filed under budget review. The medical frigate Constance, redeployment to home space for refit, filed under scheduled maintenance. Each one was true. Each one was complete. Each one, on its own, looked like the kind of ordinary administrative decision that happened in any large organization on any given day. It was only if you laid all of them side by side that the picture emerged. Nobody laid them side by side, not for a long time. My deputy during this period was a woman named Grace Ellison. Grace had spent 12 years before joining my staff working for a logistics company that moved cargo between human and non-human systems. She understood infrastructure the way most people understand language, not as a collection of rules but as something that lives and breathes and holds things together. Grace was the one who built the actual departure schedule. She sat with it for 2 weeks before she showed it to me. And when she did, she placed it on my desk without a word and sat down in the chair across from me and waited. I read it. It took a while. When I finished, I said, "Is this the most efficient sequence?" She said, "It is the most careful sequence. The Mirathi system is last. I thought about putting it earlier, but they are the most isolated. If we pull the constants before we pull anything else, someone might notice the pattern before we want them to." I looked at her. "You are thinking about this very tactically." She looked back at me with calm, steady eyes. "Ambassador," she said, "someone on the council voted to make 60,000 of our people into citizens of nowhere. I am thinking about exactly as tactically as that deserves." I approved the schedule. The months that followed had a strange quality to them. From the outside, from anyone watching the normal flow of galactic diplomatic communication, nothing appeared wrong. I attended the standard council briefings. I filed the standard reports. I had lunch with the Cadral ambassador, a warm and distracted creature named Ossavel, who liked strong tea and complained cheerfully about the council's budget process. I did not tell Ossavel what was happening. Ossavel had not voted for the resolution, but Ossavel also had not voted against it. There are things you do not say to people who chose to be somewhere else when it mattered. About 4 months in, I flew out to our last active embassy on Cadral Prime to begin the process of packing it up. The embassy building was a modest structure in the diplomatic quarter, human-built, human-furnished, with a small courtyard that one of my predecessors had planted with earth grass 20 years ago. The grass had grown well in the local climate. It was very green. A Cadral official named Pev met me at the entrance. Pev was young, curious, and had always been friendly to the human staff. He watched as we began carrying boxes to the transport vehicle parked outside. "Is this a restructuring?" he asked me, in the careful, slightly formal way that junior officials ask questions when they think the answer might be above their clearance level. I smiled at him. "Something like that," I said. I was carrying a box of files at the time. In the box, underneath the files, was a child's drawing. A Mirathi girl named Senna had given it to me 3 years earlier, during a relief visit to the Mirathi border settlements. She had drawn what she thought a human city looked like, based on photographs she had seen. It was full of very tall buildings, and what appeared to be a large number of cats. I had kept it on the wall of my office for 3 years. When I took it down to pack it, I held it for a moment longer than I needed to. Senna was 12 now. She lived in one of the border settlements that the Constance served. The Constance was the 4th to last ship on Grace's departure schedule. I put the drawing in the box and carried it to the transport. The hardest day of those 14 months was not the day I filed the paperwork to close the embassy. It was not the day the last human relay station in the Caden corridor went dark. It was a Tuesday in the 9th month, when I sat in my office on the orbital platform and read the departure confirmation for the Constance. The medical frigate had left the Mirathi system at 0630 station time. It had filed its departure as a routine refit rotation. The confirmation came through my administrative channel at 0915, tagged routine, no action required. It was the only trauma-capable medical vessel within 6 light-years of the Mirathi settlements. I sat with that for a long time. Grace came in around noon. She looked at my face and did not ask what I was thinking. "The Node 14 team will be clear of the Kepler Junction by Thursday," she said. "That is the last of the engineering contracts." "All right," I said. "After that, we have 11 weeks of administrative processing to finalize. Then we are done." "All right," I said again. She stayed in the doorway for a moment. Grace was not a person who expressed things through words when she thought action was a cleaner language. But she said quietly, "They had a vote. They thought they were taking something away from us. They did not understand that they were also giving us permission." I looked at her. "Permission to stop," she said. "Permission to find out what we were actually worth to them, because we were never going to know as long as we kept showing up." I turned back to the window. Outside, the stars were very still. 11 weeks, I said. 11 weeks, she confirmed. She left. I stayed by the window for a while. The Constance was out there somewhere, moving through the dark toward home. Senna was in the Marathi settlements with whatever medical support the local infrastructure could provide, which I had read in the briefing files and which I will not describe here, because putting the number into words made it feel smaller than it was. I did not feel good about that. I want to be clear about this, because I think it matters. Nobody on our team felt good about the Constance. Nobody felt good about the families in the border settlements, or the clinics that would be running with fewer supplies, or the cargo carriers who would lose navigation support in the outer corridors. We were not doing this because we were indifferent to the consequences. We were doing this because 42 species had looked at everything we were doing and decided it was not worth protecting. We were setting it down so they could see what they had been holding. That was the difference between letting go and surrendering. At least, that is what I told myself in those 11 weeks. I told myself every single day that it was necessary, that it was honest, that the alternative was to keep giving, and keep being told our giving meant nothing, and that no good came from that, not for us and not for anyone else. I believed it. I just did not feel good about it. That is, I have learned, what correct decisions often feel like. The Kepler Junction Bridge network failed on a Wednesday. I was in a meeting when it happened. The alert came through on the standard Galactic infrastructure broadcast, the same feed that station managers and cargo operations across 24 systems monitored continuously. The alert was brief and technical. It said that nodes 9 through 17 of the Kepler Junction network had gone into emergency shutdown mode due to cascading maintenance failures. Cascading maintenance failures. That was the official language. What it meant, in practical terms, was that 3 major trade corridors had just collapsed. The conglomerate of 7's primary cargo route from their manufacturing cluster to the inner systems ran through Node 12. The Velhari Dominion's fastest path between their 2 largest colonies passed through Node 14, which Grace's team had quietly decommissioned 11 weeks earlier. I did not celebrate when I read the alert. I want to be clear about that. I read it, I acknowledged it, and I kept it in a file. What happened over the following 3 weeks was this. The conglomerate of 7 lost approximately 11 billion units in cargo that was sitting in transit when the network failed. Cargo holds, perishable goods, time-sensitive materials for 2 construction projects. The losses were not catastrophic in the sense of causing immediate suffering, but they were significant in the sense of making a very large number of very wealthy and very powerful individuals extremely unhappy. The Velhari Dominion began rerouting traffic immediately, because the Velhari were efficient and proud and refused to ask for help. The rerouting added 19 days to their standard transit time, which in practice meant their colony exchange cycles were disrupted for the better part of a standard year. The Marathi situation was different. A colony transport carrying 460 people came out of a navigation jump on the outer edge of their system and encountered a debris field. The debris field was not new. It had been there for 6 years. For 6 years it had been tagged and tracked by a human early warning buoy network that was part of the same infrastructure package as the Caden Corridor relay stations. The buoy network had been decommissioned in month 7 of our withdrawal. The decommissioning had been filed correctly. The alert had been distributed to the relevant Council Infrastructure Committee. The committee had acknowledged receipt. The committee had not arranged replacement coverage. The transport's navigation system detected the debris field 11 seconds before impact. 11 seconds is enough time to begin an evasive maneuver. It is not enough time to complete one. There were injuries, serious ones. 41 people were taken to the Marathi Central Medical Facility. The facility was understaffed and undersupplied. The Constance, which had historically arrived on a 6-week rotation to supplement local capacity, was in dry dock at a human repair facility, waiting for a scheduled refit that had no completion date assigned to it. I read the incident report at 07 o'clock the morning after it happened. I read it twice. I thought about Senna and her drawing of a human city full of cats. I did not know if Senna was one of the 41. The names in the report were not ones I recognized. I added the report to my file. The file was getting thick. Colin found me in the break room later that morning making tea. He looked at the mug in my hands and then at my face, and made the same calculation he had been making since the shuttle ride back from the council chamber almost 2 years earlier. "I heard about the Marathi transport," he said. "Yes," I said. "Is there anything we can do from here?" I thought about that. There was a version of this where I made a call, contacted the Constants, arranged emergency redeployment, sent supplies, inserted ourselves back into the situation in a way that would have been helpful in the short term, and would have told the Council, very clearly, that humanity could be pushed out and pulled back in without any real consequence. "We wait," I said. Colin was quiet for a moment. He was not the kind of person who hid what he was feeling, which was part of what made him good at his job, and part of what made conversations like this one cost him something visible. "That is hard," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is." He nodded. He poured himself a cup of tea. We stood in the break room and drank it without talking, which is sometimes the only honest thing you can do. The Council's emergency session was called 6 weeks after the Kepler Junction failure. I received the agenda by standard diplomatic transmission, the same as always. The transmission came in the morning and sat in my inbox between a report on human agricultural exports and a notification about a maintenance schedule for our orbital platform's water recycling system. The agenda had 12 items. Item 9 was listed as concerning the absence of humanity and its effects on galactic infrastructure stability. I printed it and put it in the file. 3 days before the session, I received a formal diplomatic inquiry from the Velhari Dominion. It was addressed to the Human Office of External Affairs and requested that humanity consider the temporary resumption of relay maintenance services in the Caden Corridor, pending a review of current arrangements. Our Foreign Office responded within 24 hours. The response included a document titled Standard Commercial Licensing Terms for Infrastructure Services, Human Origin. It was 47 pages long. It included rate schedules, liability clauses, minimum contract lengths, and a section on dispute resolution that I had personally helped draft 3 months earlier. The Velhari response came back in 6 hours. It used the word extortion twice and unprecedented 4 times. Our Foreign Office replied with a one-line message: "We look forward to reviewing any proposed terms at your convenience." I read the exchange and felt something I did not have a clean name for. It was not quite satisfaction. It was more like recognition. The recognition of seeing a thing become visible that had always been there. The session I was called to was not the Council's emergency session. It was a parliamentary inquiry on our own side, a domestic review board asking whether the withdrawal had been handled correctly, and whether the outcomes we were seeing were something humanity should feel responsible for. I sat in front of the board for 3 hours. The board members were a mix of people I respected and people I did not. One of them was a young senator named Philip Avery, who had been in office for 14 months and who asked his questions with the particular combination of earnestness and sharpness that reminded me of Colin in his first year. Senator Avery leaned forward toward his microphone and said, "Ambassador Moran, when you read the report about the Marathi transport, did you feel guilty?" The room was very quiet. I thought about the honest answer. I thought about Senna. I thought about the Constants in dry dock. I thought about 41 people in a hospital that was not equipped for what had just been handed to it. I felt responsible, I said. That is not the same thing as guilty. Guilty is when you have done something wrong. Responsible is when you understand that your actions have weight, even when those actions are correct. Senator Avery studied me. "Do you believe the withdrawal was correct?" "I believe," I said carefully, "that the Council voted to remove humanity from galactic life because they had spent so long taking our presence for granted that they had forgotten what our presence actually meant. I believe the only way to make that visible was to stop being present, and I believe that a thing which is necessary is not made wrong by being painful." He was quiet for a moment. 7 words, he said. "That is what you said in the chamber." "Yes." "Were you angry when you said them?" I looked at him. Philip Avery was 29 years old. He reminded me of Colin. He deserved an honest answer. "I was precise," I said. "When you have been doing this work long enough, sometimes precise is what anger becomes." He wrote something down. He did not ask anything else. I walked out of the hearing and into a corridor that looked a great deal like the corridor outside the council chamber, 2 years and a completely different kind of quietness ago. Colin was waiting, because Colin was always waiting. "How did it go?" he said. "We were precise," I said. He smiled. It was a small smile, and a tired one, but it was real. The council emergency session happened 4 days later. I watched it on broadcast, from my office, with a cup of tea. When item 9 appeared on the agenda and Councillor Veth himself rose to address it, speaking in the measured tones of someone who has recently discovered that the floor beneath him was less solid than he had assumed, I turned the sound down slightly. I had already heard everything he was going to say. I had heard it in the Marathi incident report, in the Kepler Junction failure alert, in a 47-page commercial licensing document that the Velhari had not read yet but were going to. I had heard it in the silence of a chamber, 2 years ago, after 7 words and a closed folder. They were finally hearing it too. She made them wait. I did not plan it that way. Neither did Secretary General Lena Farrow, who received Envoy Thesivari's formal request for a meeting on a Monday morning and responded through official channels that the Secretary General's schedule would allow for a session on Thursday of the following week. This was true. Lena's schedule was full. She had not manufactured the delay. But the delay was real, and its effect was real. And when Envoy Thesivari arrived at the Human Diplomatic Reception Building in Geneva on a gray Thursday morning, she had been waiting 9 days for a meeting that she had very clearly expected to happen immediately. I was not supposed to be there. I want to be honest about this. I had been in Geneva for a different reason entirely, reviewing the final administrative processing of the withdrawal with our Office of External Affairs. When Colin told me that Thesivari had arrived and was waiting in the main reception lobby, I had been reading a budget reconciliation report for 40 minutes and was very much looking forward to finishing it before lunch. I finished the report. Then I went downstairs. Thesivari was sitting in one of the reception chairs near the window. She was tall, silver-skinned, and dressed in the formal diplomatic garments of the Velhari Dominion, which were elegant and, I had always thought, slightly uncomfortable looking. She had been a diplomat for longer than I had. I had met her at 4 previous council sessions. She was precise, intelligent, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of negotiating from a position of strength. She looked, at this particular moment, like someone who had spent 9 days rearranging their expectations and was not entirely finished with the process. I had asked one of the reception staff to let her wait an additional 10 minutes after I came downstairs. I used the time to get 2 cups of tea from the small kitchen behind the main office. I walked into the reception lobby with 2 cups of tea and an ordinary expression. "Envoy Thesivari," I said. "I apologize for the delay. Can I offer you something?" She looked at the tea. She looked at me. She accepted the cup with the particular grace of someone who has decided to treat this moment as normal. "Ambassador Moran," she said, "I was not expecting you personally." "The Secretary General will join us shortly," I said. "I thought we might talk while we wait." I sat down in the chair across from her. The window behind us showed a gray Geneva morning, the lake just visible through the mist. It was a very ordinary room. No council chamber, no translation earpieces, no security officers pretending to be furniture. Longe, just 2 people, and 2 cups of tea. Thesivari said, "We would like to discuss the possibility of resuming certain infrastructure arrangements." "I know," I said. "The situation in the Kepler Junction has created significant operational challenges for a number of council members." "I know that too," I said. She looked at me steadily. She was choosing her words carefully, the way experienced diplomats do when they are trying to say something without saying the specific thing they most need to say. I waited. She said, "The Council acknowledges that Resolution 7 Theta may have been implemented without a full assessment of its practical consequences." I put my cup down. "Envoy," I said, "I have been a diplomat for 15 years. I have sat across from a great many people in a great many rooms, and I have learned that there is a version of this conversation where we spend 2 hours saying things that both of us understand to mean something different from what we are actually saying. I would prefer not to have that version of this conversation." She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the adjustment you make when you realize the terrain is different from the map. "What version would you prefer?" she said. "The honest one," I said. There was a pause. Outside, the mist moved over the lake. Very well, she said. We need you back. The infrastructure failures since the withdrawal began are significant. The Kepler junction alone has cost the conglomerate and the Dominion more in 6 weeks than the projected cost of the original trade agreement would have over 5 years. The Mirathi situation is a tragedy that none of us wanted, and there are 11 other systems where we are beginning to see the early signs of the same kind of compounding failures that preceded the junction collapse. She paused. Humanity built things that no one else fully understood, she said. And then humanity maintained those things for decades in ways that no one fully tracked. And then humanity left, and now we are learning, in a manner that is extremely expensive and occasionally dangerous, what those things were. I picked up my tea again. Yes, I said. You are. Another pause. How do we fix it? She said. I looked at her for a moment. Thesavari was not a cruel person. She was a person who had lived in a system where humanity was so reliably present, so consistently available, so permanently there, that it had stopped occurring to anyone to ask what that presence was worth. She had voted for a resolution that said humanity's presence could be regulated away. She had not thought about what she was regulating away. She had only thought about the politics. Most people only think about the politics. There is a document, I said. 300 pages. It was prepared over 8 months. It describes every service, every infrastructure asset, every contract and operational role that humanity maintained across galactic space before the withdrawal. It attaches a value to each of those things. It proposes new terms under which humanity would resume those operations. I reached into the bag beside my chair and placed the document on the table between us. Lakshi looked at it. It was, I will admit, a substantial physical document. Grace had insisted on printing it rather than sending it electronically, on the grounds that a physical document requires a person to sit with it in a way that a file on a screen does not. Grace was right about most things. Take your time, I said. She took it. The negotiation that followed lasted 6 weeks. I will not pretend it was simple. It was not. Thesavari was experienced and she was thorough, and she fought hard for every term that she thought she could win. There were days when I went back to my hotel room and sat very still for a long time before I could sleep. There were sessions where we covered 12 pages in 4 hours, and sessions where we covered 2 pages in 4 hours. Grace was with me for all of it. She sat beside me at the table with her own copy of the document and a system of precise notations that she updated constantly, so that at any moment I could glance at her margin and know whether a proposed clause was within acceptable range. On the 4th day, a Velhari infrastructure specialist was brought in to review the technical sections. His name was Corvith, and he was clearly brilliant, and he spent about 40 minutes reading the section on Kepler Junction bridge maintenance before he looked up with an expression that I recognized. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something they should have understood years ago. Corvith looked at Thesavari. He said something in Velhari that the translator rendered as, "This is the engineering standard they were maintaining. We assumed it was standard. It is not standard." Thesavari looked at the page. Corvith said, "This is significantly above standard. They were compensating for inherent instabilities in nodes 9 through 14 that our own engineers classified as within tolerance. They were not within tolerance. They were within tolerance if and only if someone was actively compensating for them." He paused, then he said, with the flatness of someone delivering news that is not good, "There was always someone actively compensating for them. We simply never knew who." Thesavari did not look at me when he said this. She looked at her copy of the document. She turned to the section on Node 14 Alpha. She read for a while. Then she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "We did not know." I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the document had not already said more clearly. There was an evening, in the 3rd week of negotiations, when the formal sessions had ended for the day, and Thesavari and I happened to leave the building at the same time. We walked in the same direction for about half a block before either of us said anything. She said, "Can I ask you something? Not for the record." "Yes," I said. "Why did no one ever tell us? How much you were doing? What it actually was? The scope of it?" I thought about the Constance's departure confirmation, tagged routine, no action required. I thought about the maintenance logs that Grace had compiled into a 300-page document. I thought about the infrastructure budget filings, the casualty reports, The annual operational reviews. We did, I said. In the maintenance logs, in the casualty reports, in the budget filings that were submitted every quarter to the Council Infrastructure Committee. She was quiet. No one read them, I said. Not because they were hard to find. Because no one thought they mattered. Because we kept showing up, and things kept working, and it was very easy to believe that things kept working, simply because that was their natural state. We stopped at the corner. The lake was visible from here, dark now in the evening. We thought you were peripheral, she said. I know, I said. She looked at me. I think she wanted to say something that she had not yet found the words for. I did not help her find them. Some things need to be found on their own. Good night, Envoy, I said. Good night, Ambassador, she said. The treaty was signed on a Friday morning in a room in Geneva with no cameras, because we had agreed that the formal announcement would come later, through council channels, and because both sides had decided that this particular agreement did not need an audience. Lena signed for humanity. Thesavari signed for the council. Humanity's rights were not restored. I want to be precise about this. We were not given back what we had before. What we had before was membership in a body that had decided our membership was negotiable. We did not want that back. What we signed was different. Humanity became the primary licensed infrastructure partner of the Galactic Council. We set the terms, we set the rates, we set the maintenance standards, the operational protocols, the response timelines, and the conditions under which any of those things could be renegotiated. We were no longer members, we were the foundation. In the margin of her copy of the document, Grace had written one small note on the final page. I saw it when I picked up her copy to hand it to the filing staff. It said, "They finally looked at the logs." 2 years after the treaty signing, I stood in the Mirathi outer settlement on a cold morning in early spring and watched a crew of 12 engineers reconnect the rebuilt relief station to the main medical supply grid. The station was larger than the one that had been there before. It had been designed by a joint team of human and Mirathi engineers, and the design showed that it had the practical efficiency of human construction, married to the Mirathi preference for interior spaces that felt open rather than enclosed. So the ceilings were higher than they needed to be, and the light panels were set to cycle through the wavelengths that Mirathi physiology responded best to. I had been involved in the design review. It was one of the things I did now, in my 3rd year as Director of Galactic Infrastructure Relations, which was the title that came with the job I had agreed to take when Lena offered it to me 6 months after the treaty. The morning was cold. I was wearing a coat that was slightly too thin for the weather, because I had packed for a shorter visit, and the final work had taken an extra day. Colin was standing next to me, also slightly too cold, holding 2 cups of something that the Mirathi called morning drink, and that tasted, in my estimation, like strong tea mixed with something that was not quite cinnamon. I had gotten used to it. There was a small group of local settlement residents watching the work. They stood at a respectful distance, the way people stand when they are watching something that matters and do not want to interrupt it. A few of them had brought children. One of those children caught my eye. She was perhaps 14 years old. She had the characteristic Mirathi look, a slight luminescence to the skin that the cold air made more visible. She was watching the reconnection work with complete attention, and she had a small data pad under one arm, on which she had been writing notes, from what I could see, about the engineering process. I did not know if she was Senna. I thought she might be. Colin handed me my morning drink. I took it. The grid connection test is in about 10 minutes, he said. Then the formal activation ceremony. Then the reception. Good, I said. He looked at me sidelong. How are you? It was the kind of question Colin asked now, since he had been promoted to Chief of Staff and had taken on the full weight of that role, which meant he spent a great deal of time understanding how I was before I understood it myself. I am thinking about something Lena said, I said. When she told me about the withdrawal plan, she said we were not surrendering. We were setting things down so that people could see what they had been holding. I remember, Colin said. You told me about that on the shuttle. I did not fully understand it then, I said. I thought it was a good way of framing a painful decision. I did not think it was literally what would happen. He looked at the relief station, at the engineers working, at the settlement residents watching. "And now," he said. "Now I think she was describing the most important thing about what we did," I said. "We did not prove our value by fighting. We did not make speeches or deliver ultimatums. We did not try to convince anyone of anything. We just put it down. And then everyone who had been relying on it without knowing it suddenly had to pick it up themselves, and they discovered that it was very heavy." Colin thought about this. "It is not a comfortable feeling," he said, "having proved something that way." "No," I said, "it is not." The morning drink was warming my hands through the cup. Around us, the settlement was going about its day. People moved on the paths between the buildings. Someone was arguing cheerfully about something in the market area a block away. A supply carrier moved overhead, running its standard route. Ordinary life, the kind that happens when infrastructure is working and people do not have to think about infrastructure. "Do you regret any of it?" Colin said. I thought about the Constants leaving the Mirathi system. I thought about the 41 people in the hospital. I thought about Corvith reading the Node 14 Alpha maintenance logs with the expression of someone learning that the ground had always been less stable than he had assumed. I thought about Thesavari on the corner by the lake, looking for words. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I do not regret that we did it." Colin nodded. The chief engineer called out to her team. The grid connection was ready. There was a sequence of tests that needed to run before the formal activation, and she walked them through each one with the calm focus of someone who has done this many times before and finds the repetition reassuring rather than boring. The tests passed. Green lights down the board. Then the ceremony happened, which was brief and warm and involved several speeches in Mirathi that our translators rendered into close but not perfect equivalents. The settlement administrator spoke about the importance of partnership. A representative from the Council Infrastructure Committee, who had come out specifically for the occasion, spoke about the value of collaboration and the strength of the new accord. He did not mention Resolution 7 Theta. He did not mention the withdrawal. He did not mention the Kepler Junction failures, or the transport incident, or the constants. He spoke about the future. I let him. At the reception afterward, the girl I thought might be Senna came over to where I was standing. She had the data pad under her arm, and she looked at me with the directness that young people sometimes have before they learn to soften it. "You are Ambassador Moran," she said. "I am," I said. "You were the one who was in the chamber when they passed the resolution," she said. I looked at her. "Yes. My teacher told us about it," she said. "She said you said 7 words and then walked out." "That is correct." She was quiet for a moment, working something out. "Why 7 words?" she said. "Why not more?" I considered the question seriously, the way I try to consider questions asked by people who are genuinely trying to understand something. "Because 7 was enough," I said. "Everything else we needed to say, we said differently." She thought about this. She looked at the data pad in her hands. Then she looked at the relief station, bright and clean in the morning light. "I am studying engineering," she said. "Good," I said. "Infrastructure engineering?" "Maintenance systems," she said. "My teacher says the most important work in any system is the work that keeps it running, not the building, the keeping." I looked at her. "Your teacher is very wise," I said. She smiled. It was the direct, uncomplicated smile of someone who has not yet learned to hold it back. She went back to her friends. I stood there for a moment longer, holding my cup, watching the station settle into its first full day of operation. Colin appeared at my elbow. "Ready to head back?" "Almost," I said. I stayed a few minutes more. The engineers were packing up their equipment. The settlement residents were going home. The light was changing as the Mirathi star moved behind the cloud layer, and the settlement softened in that light, became something that looked very much like home. Somewhere out there, a relay station was running. A bridge network was holding. A cargo carrier was navigating a corridor that was safe, because someone had mapped it and kept the map current. A child on some station I would never visit was receiving medical care because the ship that brought the supplies had arrived on schedule, and the schedule had been maintained because the people responsible for maintaining it had simply, consistently, without announcement or recognition, shown up. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. Not the loudest voice in the chamber, Not the most powerful weapon in the fleet. Not the species that wins by force, or fear, or spectacle. We are the ones who show up, who fix things, who stay. The Council learned what that meant when we stopped. They learned it the hard way, through every broken network and every failed node and every preventable emergency that fell into the gap our absence created. They learned it in 6 weeks of watching the Kepler junction fall apart, and in 47 pages of licensing terms, and in a 6-week negotiation in Geneva, where they slowly understood, clause by clause, that they had never been paying the real price for what they had. They know now. So do we. That is the difference between where we started and where we are. Not that we proved ourselves. Not that we made them apologize. Not that we won a fight we were never interested in having. The difference is this. We know what we are worth now, precisely and in writing. And they know it too. And none of us will forget it again. That is enough. On the flight home, I took out the drawing that Senna had made when she was 12 years old. A human city, very tall, full of cats. I put it back in my bag. I opened my work files. There was a new infrastructure review to read, a maintenance schedule for 3 relay stations in the outer Caden corridor, a proposal for expanding the Kepler junction capacity to handle new traffic once 2 additional systems joined the accord. Good work, real work, the kind that holds things together. I started reading.